This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Telly Edwards. Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Now, China's premier expresses confidence, reforms, a shift to a consumption-led model and more support for its Belt and Road Initiative will allow it to remain the main driving force for the global economy. Meantime, Beijing slams NATO for using its military build-up as an excuse to boost spending as China hosts its own defense gathering that includes Russia and Iran. A South Korean President Lee, in his first budget speech, urges swift approval of a massive spending plan, calling the economy desperate amid stagnant growth. And no tariffs deal yet for Japan and South Korea as the deadline looms. Seoul urges the U.S. to ensure stable ground for Korean firms, while Tokyo presses on with trade talks. And Japan's rice crisis that has been a thorn in the government's plans, showing some signs of easing as prices drop and stocks return to shelves.
Where is China's economy headed, and how do the country's domestic challenges square with its rapidly growing sectors, such as in AI? I'm Olivia Xiang at the World Economic Forum in Tianjin, and I'll bring you what experts here are saying just ahead.
Also in East Asia tonight, a massive new resort opens for domestic tourists in North Korea. Now, this pet project of leader Kim Jong-un may even welcome foreign visitors in the future. China vows to take forceful steps to boost domestic consumption and remain the world's biggest driver of economic growth. Premier Li Qiang said this today at the opening of the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank's annual meeting in Beijing. Now, Mr. Li said that the growing Chinese market will pay enormous dividends and create more trade and investment opportunities around the world. He also asked the multilateral bank to increase its support for China's Belt and Road Initiative. His comments follow warnings from both the International Monetary Fund and World Bank that this year's growth across Asia might see a slowdown. Well, this is largely due to what they predict as China's cooling economy and trade tensions with the West. Now, 110 nations make up the AIIB, China leading the group with a close to a 30% voting share. Members include Germany, the UK, France and Russia, as well as Israel, Singapore and Vietnam. CNA's Tan Yu-Guan joins us live now from Shanghai. Yu-Guan, firstly, help us understand why did Premier Lee's address seek to reassure concerns over China's economy?
Well, he has to, because boosting consumption is a key plank in his government's strategy to overcome the trade tensions with the U.S. Now, one of the critical factors for local consumption is consumer sentiment. Now, some business people I speak to here in Shanghai like to tell me that, it's not like the urbanites in China have no money to spend. They just don't have the confidence yet to spend it. So in his speech at AIIB, Li Qiang reminded attendees that his government is strengthening macro policies to expand and forcefully boost consumption. He says policy support rolled out since late last year is helping to boost domestic demand, and that China's economy is showing resilience despite a slowing global economy and fresh external challenges. Now, in some ways, the numbers do show that, those green shoots of optimism that Li Qiang spoke about. In May, retail sales of consumer goods shows a year-on-year increase of 6.4%. That's after April, showing a figure that was up 5.1%. Right. Now, from January to May, the increase was 5%. Now, for context, the U.S. recorded a fall of 0.9% in May. You can feel these more optimistic vibes on the streets of Shanghai, thanks to visa-free policies and easier tax refund rules for tourists. You do see more people along the shopping streets. And just a stone's throw away from where we are right now, Louis Vuitton just unveiled its ostentatious 3-story flagship store in the form of a luxury liner. Now, as we know, luxury brands has been suffering lower sales in China since COVID struck. For Louis Vuitton to invest so much to build its biggest flagship store in Shanghai in the form of a ship does show to some extent the confidence it has in the Chinese market going forward. Otelli?
Yeah, that's quite a massive ship we can see there on the screens. Now, you talked about this optimism and the sort of vibes that, he's trying to relay. But he has also, at the same time, the Chinese Premier asked for more support for the Belt and Road Initiative. So what kind of help exactly is he looking for? And how likely do you think the AIIB will be providing that help?
Well, Li Qiang says he hopes AIIB will persevere in promoting connection and communication among Asian countries and countries across the world. He also added that it is important to strengthen the synergy between the bank and the Belt and Road Initiative. His remarks echoes that of his finance minister yesterday. Lan Fo-an called for the AIIB to mobilize additional resources to support cross-border connectivity to fill the funding gap for such projects in developing countries. So the common theme there is connectivity for developing countries. While connectivity is good for developing countries, there is an element of self-interest here for China. China has been actively trying to open up new markets for its products in developing countries to make up for trade barriers put up by the US. But unlike the United States, logistics and connectivity in these developing countries could be lacking and therefore could hinder trade flows. Therefore, investment projects to connect developing countries can help Chinese goods flow more smoothly. Now, recently I was in the export hub of EU and I spoke to a maker of Christmas decorations. And for her, Latin America is one of her growing markets. And she says logistics is so poor that in those emerging economies, buyers from that region has to order their Christmas products way ahead of time, up to half a year ahead, in order for the goods to arrive in that region in time for Christmas. Now, that's compared to like 3 months in other more developed markets. That just gives you an idea how important better connectivity is to trade flows. So while AIIB says it's an independent banking entity, China does have a 26% share in the bank. So China can use its voting power to nudge the bank towards funding rail, port, or road projects, facilitating the flow of Chinese exports to these markets. Otelli?
Well, it sounds very promising. Thanks so very much for that report. CNA's Tan Yu-guan in Shanghai. The World Economic Forum in China is wrapping up today, and more than 1,700 global leaders took part in the 3-day event in Tianjin, also known as the Summer Davos. Well, CNA spoke to the Italian Deputy Minister of Enterprises and asked him about Italy's decision to exit the Belt and Road Initiative in 2023.
We pulled out of the Belt and Road because the decision about the Belt and Road was political and not economic. We didn't pull out of the relationship with China. We turned it into a much more constructive relationship. We have a strategic partnership. And of course, you cannot think of economic growth without taking into consideration China for its, as a market, as an innovator, as the second largest for the moment economy in the world. Of course, it creates certain problems. Of course, we have to sit down and probably iron out some of the differences. But why that? Because I think that there's much more opportunity there and potentialities that are untapped in our relationship. I look at the numbers and we're always very much surprised that our trade with other parts of the world, much smaller than China, is much bigger. So I think there's room there to grow, but of course for that to grow, we have to allay reciprocal fears. We have to make sure that that happens in a context that is different. And this to close this whole debate, I hope that this crisis, this tariff crisis, would become the silver lining. And the Latins used to say, ex malo bono. Out of bad things, good things can come, and I hope it's ex malo bono in our relationship to China and in relationship of China with the rest of the world.
Meantime, Beijing has strongly criticized NATO's military spending hike, saying that the military alliance should not be using China as an excuse for expansion. The Chinese Foreign Ministry decried NATO's warnings of China's military buildup as an excuse to justify the bloc's own expansion in the Asia-Pacific.
北约有关人士渲染国际地区紧张局势，诋毁中国正常军力建设。 无非是为北约大幅增加军费，肆意越界扩权，图谋东进亚太，寻找借口。
China is hosting its own defense gathering, framing the meeting as a stabilizing force in the aftermath of fresh conflict in the Middle East. Defense ministers from Iran and Russia are among the attendees of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SCO, in Qingdao. The gathering in Qingdao also has officials from India and Pakistan meeting face-to-face for the first time since their worst military clash in decades. But the Indian defense minister has reportedly refused to sign a joint statement over its failure to address India's concern on cross-border terrorism. Elsewhere, South Korean President Lee Jae-myung calls on Parliament to swiftly approve a $22.4 billion supplementary budget aimed at reviving the economy. Mr. Lee is seeking support for his first budget proposal, calling the country's situation desperate, with stagnant growth, high inflation and difficult times for small businesses. CNA's Lim Yeon-suk has more.
This was Korean President Lee Jae-myung's first address to lawmakers in Parliament since he took office on June 4th. He started off his speech by addressing the economy, saying it was in a grave state.
미국발 관세 충격부터 최근의 이스라엘, 이란 전쟁까지 급변하는 국제 정세는 한치 앞을 예측하기 어렵습니다. 그래서 지금은 경제가 다시 뛸 수 있도록 정부가 나설 때입니다.
Some two-thirds of the proposed budget, or about $15 billion, will go towards new spending aimed at boosting consumption, investing in AI, and expanding welfare. Mr. Lee added that peace on the Korean Peninsula will also help the economy. Unlike the previous conservative government of Yoon Suk-yeol, the new president has said it is important to seek dialogue with North Korea. Mr. Lee's budget request is expected to pass as his Democratic Party holds a majority in the 300-seat parliament. But he acknowledged the need to overcome partisan divisions which had hindered policy making under the previous administration.
추가할 게 있으시다면 언제든지 의견을 내주시기를 부탁드립니다. 다행히 새 정부 출범 이후에 정치적 불확실성이 해소되면서 소비 심리가 많이 개선되고 있습니다.
Mr. Lee's speech was met with applause from ruling party members. With no reaction from the area where the opposition was seated, he walked towards the opposition lawmakers and shook their hands before leaving the chamber. It was a similar scene when former President Yoon made his first speech on budget in Parliament in May 2022. But when he returned to make another speech in October, opposition lawmakers boycotted it. It remains to be seen if President Lee will be able to heal political divisions and push through further reforms. Lim Yeon-suk, CNA, Seoul.
Meantime, South Korea's Trade Minister Yohan Koo is in Washington for talks with U.S. congressmen before the current pause on reciprocal tariffs is lifted in July. Seoul and Washington had agreed to work out a package of deals to remove the U.S. tariffs by the 8th of July. In Washington, Mr. Yo lobbied U.S. congressmen to create a more stable and predictable environment for South Korean businessmen. He also met U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer and Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. Japan is also seeking a similar trade agreement. Its lead negotiator, Ryose Akazawa, heading to Washington for another round of talks. He is expected to meet U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent to stress that Washington's additional 25% auto tariffs are unacceptable. Coming up next on East Asia Tonight, the Bank of Korea moves to inject liquidity into the market so as to boost money supply starting from next month. And Hong Kong set to welcome FWD Group's IPO, which could help rebound listing volumes this year in Asia's financial hub.
MediaCorp has been honored as Broadcaster of the Year at the 2025 World Media Festival. From Singapore to the world, our gripping documentaries and unforgettable entertainment continue to inspire, captivate, and connect audiences across the globe. This award celebrates the passion and talent behind every story we tell. Watch the award-winning programs on demand for free on MeWatch.
A hashtag is trending among young Indonesians. Hashtag kabur aja dulu, or just get out first.
Kayaknya memang mereka tuh juga mengeluarkan unek-unek mereka.
I think the intention to leave is real.
Why are young Indonesians seeking greener pastures overseas?
Industri ini tidak bisa lagi menyerap tenaga kerja dan bisa menjadi penopang ekonomi.
And will Indonesia lose its best and brightest? Insight tonight on CNA.
One of these diamonds costs 4 times as much as the other. Now, if you can't tell the difference, are diamonds still forever?
How working round the clock helped this young boss go from 1 store to 7.
In fangirling, money is really important.
Plus, strategies to be a K-pop super fan without breaking the bank. Money Mind, Saturday on CNA.
Hello again. Good to have your company on East Asia tonight. It is now time for your business news with Roland Lim. So, Roland, Japan's rice issues again, that apparently costing the agriculture minister his job, is now back in focus. What's that all about?
Right, Oteli. Yes, there may be some light at the end of the tunnel, though, if you like the taste of rice. Respite could be on the horizon for the people of Japan after months of facing soaring prices and shortages of rice. That's the country's staple grain. The average price of rice fell below 4,000 yen per 5 kilograms for the first time in about 3.5 months to 3,920 yen. That's about $27. Now, that's according to data from the Agriculture Ministry, which attributes the easing to the increased distribution of stockpiles. Rice has been a hot-button topic in Japan, with surging prices and shortages leading to empty shelves in supermarkets across the country. Prices rose sharply in the second half of last year on the back of poor harvests the previous year and an outsized demand from tourists. They accelerated further in the first half of this year. Even after the latest fall, the average price of rice remains nearly double of that a year ago. South Korea's sole aircraft manufacturer, Korea Aerospace Industry, says it has signed a second contract worth $1.7 billion to produce KF-21 fighter jets. The deal with the State Defense Procurement Agency includes 20 KF-21 units, along with follow-up logistics support. The procurement agency is trying to deliver a total of 40 KF-21 fighter jets to the Air Force by 2028. Now, to this end, Korea Aerospace has already signed a deal last year to produce the first set of 20 KF-21 jets. That deal was worth $1.4 billion. South Korea launched the KF-21 development program jointly with Indonesia back in 2015 to develop a homegrown supersonic fighter to replace its aging fleets of F-4s and F-5 jets. South Korea's central bank says it plans to begin injecting liquidity via repurchase agreements, or repo, to boost the money supply from next month. The Bank of Korea says starting from the 10th of July, it'll buy bonds with a 14-day repo every Tuesday and sell them with a 7-day repo every Thursday. BOK has been mainly buying repos in a regular manner to adjust liquidity in the financial system. The country is seeing increased money outflows due to overseas stock investments by Koreans and falling money supply from abroad. At the same time, there has been an increasing demand for money locally. Quick check on the South Korean currency and the government bonds. Korean won currently stronger against the greenback, 1,356.60 to the dollar. And for the short-term bond, one-year bond yields at 2.3%. The longer-term 10-year bond yields at 2.803%. Hong Kong's de facto central bank has intervened to defend the city's currency peg to the greenback. As you can see, the Hong Kong dollar is nearing that upper trading band of 7.85 to the greenback. The Hong Kong dollar has experienced sharp swings over the past 2 months as foreign and Chinese capital flocked to share offerings or to pick up undervalued stocks. The Hong Kong Monetary Authority purchased $1.2 billion of the local currency after the exchange rate hit the weak side of the band for the first time in 2 years last Friday. The move will also make bearish bets more costly. The last time the central bank intervened in this direction was more than 2 years ago. Insurer FWD Group looking to raise around $442 million in a Hong Kong listing. It's pricing shares at 38 Hong Kong dollars per share. That's about $4.80, giving the company a valuation of $6.2 billion. Now, filings show institutional investors include the Mubadala Capital, which is a subsidiary of Abu Dhabi's Sovereign Wealth Fund, as well as a subsidiary of Japanese life insurer TND Holdings. The stock will trade on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange on July 7th. And it also has an option to sell more shares to raise another $67 million. FWD Group says it's using the funds to improve its capital position, reduce debt, and grow its customer base. This is the Hong Kong listing following several failed attempts at an IPO. FWD Group aimed to list in New York back in 2021, but was blocked due to regulatory hurdles, with authorities treating it as a Chinese business rather than a Hong Kong entity. It tried again in 2022, but put those plans on hold due to the volatile global markets. The insurer is backed by billionaire Richard Lee, he's son of Hong Kong's richest person, Li Ka-shing. The Shanghai Gold Exchange has opened its first offshore gold vault and rolled out 2 contracts in Hong Kong. Now, this comes as China seeks greater influence in the global commodities markets. The exchange says trading will be conducted in Chinese yuan and settled in cash or physical delivery. The bullion vault will be operated by the Bank of China's Hong Kong unit and will trade in 2 purities, 99.99 and 99.5. Now, to entice traders, the exchange says it'll waive fees until the end of the year. China is both the world's top producer and consumer of gold. Since its establishment in 2002, the Shanghai Gold Exchange has become the single largest exchange for physical gold. But its average daily trading volume over the counter pales in comparison to London. Quick check on gold prices is currently trading up 0.27%, 3,341.12 per ounce. The precious metal has rallied nearly 30% this year amid global economic uncertainties as investors flock to it as a safe haven asset. And now to soft commodities. Global coffee consumption set to reach new historical peaks this October, according to a fresh report from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Now, that increased demand will likely affect the price of your daily cup of joe, which has already been dealing with trickle-down effects from the trade war. Clara Lee explains how tariffs affect coffee prices in the U.S. and the rest of the world.
Whether you get your caffeine fix from a cafe, a coffee shop, or make it at home, you might be paying more this year. Reports show that coffee prices rose 38.8% in 2024, and by the end of this year, coffee prices are expected to rise even further. U.S. President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs are partly to blame. The 10% duties hit most countries, including key coffee bean suppliers such as Brazil and Vietnam, where levies are set to rise to 46% in July. These tariff uncertainties are making things difficult for roasters, who don't have the option of growing beans on their own. That's because coffee plantations thrive near the equator and in high altitudes.
Countries around the world get their coffee beans from various sources, but the 2 main ones are Vietnam and Brazil. Together, they account for about half of the world's supply. But last year, prolonged dry weather in Vietnam caused a 20% drop in coffee production. Meanwhile, Brazil was hit by severe droughts. One bank estimates production from the country fell by 6.4%. On a global scale, green coffee exports were down about 14% on year in February, and lower supply means prices go up. This set a record price for raw coffee at about $9.70 per kilogram. Now, bear in mind that the price of beans isn't the only problem. The cost of other components such as fertilizer, milk, packaging, wages, and rent have also jumped. And circling back to those tariffs, roasters around the world are left to deal with aftershocks. For example, the trade war is weakening the US dollar, which has a direct impact on the coffee market.
Coffee are traded in US dollars. And when US dollar drops, exporting countries do not want to sell.
This has urged some suppliers to use fillers such as corn, wheat, and barley. When ground and mixed with coffee, the average consumer can't tell it apart from the real deal. The result is usually marketed as a coffee powder mixture. Mr. Lim explains that while his own roaster doesn't use fillers, some coffee shops are already putting them to work.
If you go outside the coffee shops and all this, right, if you drink a cup of kopi, all is probably about 30% to 40% fillers right now.
But for cafes that prioritize quality, that isn't an option. So they're looking for other ways to deal with the rising costs.
I mean, we're all here to earn money at the end of the day, right? Absorbing it 100%, I think, is definitely not the way to go. Instead, finding alternatives is possible. Looking towards blends, rather, let's say, single origins, is one way.
50% of their house blend comes from Brazilian beans. The other 50% comes from Papua New Guinea. This keeps things cheaper and more supply chain resilient. But if costs continue to rise, cafes like Echo may be forced to raise prices.
And you're up to date with the business news. Oteli.
Thanks so much for that, Roland. We are going to go for a short break now, but coming up on East Asia tonight. Chinese tech leaders say the AI ecosystem in Asia's biggest economy is bracing for takeoff. We ask an expert how far China is from catching up with the US. Also in the spotlight are the World Economic Forum in China, renewable energy, and how AI could help tackle the climate crisis.
The weather brought to you by Trafalgar. Unlock the best of Europe and beyond. Visit Trafalgar.com.
This is East Asia Tonight, and here are the headlines we've been following. China says that it will continue to be the world economy's biggest driving force. Premier Li Qiang says that Beijing will take forceful steps to boost domestic consumption. Meantime, Beijing is calling out NATO. The Foreign Ministry says the North Atlantic bloc is using China as an excuse to justify an increase in defense spending. South Korea's new President Lee seeking a green light for his proposed budget. He says the country is in desperate times with stagnant economic growth and high inflation. Chinese tech companies at the World Economic Forum in Tianjin say that the country's AI ecosystem is coming to life, and Beijing's focus on clean energy and tech talent is helping it gain momentum. Now, robotics firm Unitree, now considered a unicorn with a more than $1 billion valuation, says it benefited from ready access to talent.
比如说像浙江的话，有比较开放的营商环境，然后大家的话，各方面的人才也比较集聚一些。这样的话，我们可以招揽更优秀的人才加入我们公司。然后再加上我们公司，因为早些年的话，因为公司的行业相对来说更早期一些，人也更少。
The Unitree CEO says that cities are building their own ecosystems to attract businesses. A panel about China's approach to AI also highlighted the need for safety and regulation around how it's applied in daily life. Industry leaders say China is at an inflection point, bracing for rapid growth after breakthroughs such as DeepSeek.
Since March this year, I see a lot of Chinese companies catching up on the chip side, on the foundation model side, and I think even a little bit more advanced on the industry application. Because China, there's a wide diversity of industries, and a lot of companies like us, we have digitized and help the data become usable in the AI phase. So I think in the application stage, I think there's a chance that China will quickly grow and emerge.
All right, for more insights, let's bring in George Chen. He's Managing Director and Co-Chair of Digital Practice at the Asia Group. Well, thanks for joining us, George. First up, let's just talk about China's ambitions here. Well, they're clearly stepping up with its own homegrown large language models. But how would you interpret Beijing's ambitions and also its underlying motivation? You know, how much ground do they actually need to make up on the U.S.?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I think you're right. I think Beijing considers AI as the new battlefield, for competition with the U.S. As we all know, when the internet was created, it was a very much a U.S. thing. China didn't really get the chance to make the rules. Do a lot of innovation. But now the Chinese government considers AI as the new internet, the new internet era, and a lot of people in China, even the ordinary people, the consumers, believe this is now China's time, to leverage AI, for the next phase of economic growth. So the ambition is, quite clear, and not to mention, China got the DeepSeek, to compete with ChatGPT. That's in the AI, app front. But China also got the Huawei, trying to rival NVIDIA. In the chip front, and you just got Unitree CEO on your news program. That's right. Unitree is another example. They are going to compete with Elon Musk's robots. So basically, everything you can find in the US, there's alternative in China right now in the AI space.
And George, I can't help but notice this term, new quality productive forces, bandied about in the report, quite often, basically to describe its growth model. But what does it actually mean in practice, and how is this going to impact its policy direction, and how are they going to implement it?
So the new quality productivity is probably one of the favorite terms President Xi Jinping will often use. In Chinese, we call it the 心智生产力. What's new here is, I think, Beijing tried to make a difference between, the older perception about China being the world factory, but more for labor-intensive productivity. The so-called new quality productivity here is more like AI-powered, high-tech, emerging tech, powered productivity. For example, we talked about DeepSeek, but a lot of people outside China probably haven't realized that actually DeepSeek has been applied across all sectors. I know, a supermarket operator in China, for example, already use DeepSeek AI model to analysis their CRM, for example. Even a coffee shop chain is trying to embed the DeepSeek for some marketing activities with the consumers. So there's a high hope from the top leadership that yes, the U.S. will still take the lead in terms of AI technologies. No doubt about it. I think DeepSeek is perhaps like 70%, 80% of the depending on different measures. If you compare with ChatGPT of OpenAI, but in terms of the scale of applications, how you apply AI to business sector across all industries, China is already, quite leading the trend. Probably, will be ahead of the U.S. Given China's very, top-down approach.
Yeah, and China typically, when they set their mind to doing something, they do a pretty good job of it, I have to say. But would you say, George, that some of this tech is being pushed out before it is really ready? And I'm trying to ask if it poses any sort of risk to using AI before the groundwork is actually fully in place?
Very much. That's why people talking about AI governance. I think this is as equally important as AI technology itself. In this aspect, unfortunately, we also see very different set of values, thinking, on basically how to write the rules and standards on world stage, for AI operations in the future. As I mentioned, that when the internet was created, it's basically a US-led, internet governance, model. And then China feels that right now, this is China's time to also participate in setting the rules. We talk about the risks, most of the risks come from three aspects: safety, security, and privacy. For safety, it's easy to understand. For example, should we allow kids, like at what minimum age, started to have access to AI, right? And security could cover, things like deepfake. This is also a huge issue that can also cause financial scams, for China and the rest of the world. And data privacy, this is already an existing problem from the social media era, and the data privacy concern will just get even bigger, more risky in the AI era.
And of course, regulation is a recurring theme here. What kind of regulatory framework you think China is trying to build? And I guess, how does it differ from approaches in the West?
That's right. So globally, right now, you already see the European Union, made the world's first AI law. This is like a master law model, a risk-based approach in terms of different level of risks, and then what kind of penalties if things go wrong. I don't see China right now is ready for a master law, particularly after the success of DeepSeek. As President Xi met a bunch of Chinese tech leaders earlier this year, I think China is more leaning on the innovation, at least for now. They are trying to encourage more successes like DeepSeek. If you get like a dozen DeepSeek-like success, that can significantly push the country forward in terms of economic potential, right? So, but on the other side, China also wants to keep things under control, just like, for other sectors, property and other sectors. So the primary regulator is the Cyberspace Administration of China, CAC, which has been the primary regulator for internet for a long time. So CAC is trying to, like piece by piece, they have the specific regulation about deepfake. They have the specific regulation about, how to put the models, for beta, for testing. You need to get approval from CAC. This is like a quite unthinkable, outside China. So I think China's approach is like piece by piece. What's the most risky area, and let's tackle it. But in the meantime, let's also not harm innovation. Let's not use a master law, to over-regulate. At least for now. When you have more successes, the ball can be always in the regulator's court. They can make regulations later.
All right, certainly interesting times ahead. I'm afraid that's all the time we have, George, but thanks very much for teaching me new Chinese words, 心智生产力. I shall keep that in mind. Thank you very much, George Chen there, Managing Director and Co-Chair of Digital Practice at the Asia Group. Now, leaders at the World Economic Forum in Tianjin have zeroed in on the predictive potential of AI in tackling the climate crisis amid concerns about funding, given changing political priorities and geopolitical friction. And the need to scale up renewable energy options is growing more urgent as the planet gets warmer year after year. CNA's Lauren Ong reports from Tianjin.
Under a rooftop designed to let in natural light, attendees of the so-called Summer Davos event in Tianjin, China, are discussing the power of the sun and other energy sources, exploring ways to scale up renewables in the face of a growing climate crisis. The global energy transition has been a key talking point here, with bold ideas and new approaches taking center stage.
I think that what's changed is how we talk about climate finance.
Now, these conversations come at a critical moment. 2024 marked the hottest year on record, meaning people are using more and more energy to stay cool. Add that to a global electrification push and an AI boom, and demand for energy is surging. A World Economic Forum report says it jumped 2.2% last year, the fastest growth in a decade. The potential of artificial intelligence is part of the conversation and how it can build on ways it has already contributed to energy transition, from managing energy use and demand to forecasting weather. This could mean tapping AI's predictive potential to help governments prioritize projects in the future.
Because the resources, the biggest constraint is resources for any country in today's world, especially in a very geopolitically tense world, where every country is prioritizing spending on defense. So the resource availability for clean tech and climate tech is going down. So that's why this idea is even better. Where I think about prioritizing which projects are actually going to work on the ground.
But AI itself could also contribute to this energy demand.
AI is going to need a lot more data centers, and data centers are going to create a massive increase in the demand for power. So that's on one side of the equation. The other side of the equation, AI can be leveraged to improve efficiencies in all the different energy systems we have.
The whole world can be more energy efficient, can be more productive in terms of getting AI. But of course, people say AI uses a lot of data center capacity, and data center uses a lot of energy, and they use a lot of water to cool the data centers. But I do know that there are some data center companies, like 3 or 4 companies. All the new data centers are run by renewable energy.
Still, experts warn that momentum could stall, with financial and geopolitical concerns bringing competing priorities. U.S. President Donald Trump's re-election has also raised concerns about the climate commitments of America, the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases after China.
The overall picture is a bit mixed. We see the opportunity to realign a little bit the investments that are being made with some of these new technologies, with clean technologies, with dedicating a bit more to more resilient systems, energy systems, and to definitely increasing the commitment to a rebalancing of the energy mix in many of the countries.
But bright spots remain, with industry leaders turning to countries such as China, whose heavy investment in the green energy transition throughout the years has made technologies cheaper and more accessible.
It's a shifting landscape for sustainability, for climate and energy. So in some parts of the world, there has been backtracking, backslashing and greenwashing, whatever you have. But in some other parts of the world, particularly in Asia, we're going forward. We're not stopping on our energy transition, because we do understand that for future generations, we need to leave them with the right kind of resources.
With Asia's biggest economies leaning in, leaders here hope action will ripple outward, turning ambition into global acceleration. Lauren Ong, CNA, Tianjin, China.
Time now for another break. But coming up on East Asia tonight, CNA's Olivia Seong speaks to economist Ke Yu-jin at the Summer Davos in Tianjin and asks her where China's economy is headed.
MediaCorp has been honored as Broadcaster of the Year at the 2025 World Media Festival. From Singapore to the world, our gripping documentaries and unforgettable entertainment continue to inspire, captivate, and connect audiences across the globe. This award celebrates the passion and talent behind every story we tell. Watch the award-winning programs on demand for free on MeWatch.
Ginger,
ham,
nutmeg, mushroom.
My mom used to make our own. Now she can't remember the recipe.
I'm Jonathan, MasterChef alum. This week, I'm helping a family revive childhood memories.
Cannot tie a dead knot. She was scolding.
And I may have my biggest critic yet.
My
Finding Lost Recipes. Saturday on CNA.
I'm Teresa Tang, host of the CNA Correspondent Podcast. Every week, I go behind the scenes with our network of journalists to get their on-the-ground insight, analysis, and anecdotes as they cover stories in Asia and beyond.
What was it like being with the hostage's father?
It was emotional, to say the least.
Candid conversations that are in-depth and enlightening. So this Southeast Asia trip for President Xi, it's very deliberate.
Yeah, you know, after those sweeping tariffs, China is really trying to shore up its alliances in the region.
I have to ask, what did they serve on the papal plane?
Oh, tiramisu. It was the best tiramisu I've ever had in my life.
Make the CNA Correspondent Podcast a weekly habit. Find us on the CNA or Me Listen apps, YouTube, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
We all think we know the real Bangkok, but do we? I get up close and personal with unique forms of heat.
I feel like a hunter now.
Chili hunter.
The Thai royals, do they normally eat very ผ็?
Not very ผ็.
Yeah.
And then I told you have a balanced taste.
This is Mang Da. Oh, okay, let's try it.
In Search of Heat, Wednesday on CNA.
Pressed for time? Understand today's top stories fast. Dive deeper when you want. Go to cna.asia or download the app now.
The trajectory of Asia's largest economy, a major focus on the final day of the World Economic Forum in China. And CNA's Olivia Xiong speaks to economist Ke Yu-jin in Tianjin on whether the Chinese economy will be able to hit its growth target and the challenges ahead as the Asian superpower seeks to transit to a consumption-based model.
The ongoing trade war with the U.S. and domestic challenges such as in its property sector and weak domestic consumption form the backdrop of discussions on China's economy during the final day here at the World Economic Forum. China's leaders remain bullish, but economists have been mixed about whether the country will achieve its GDP growth target of around 5% for this year. I met up with renowned economist Ke Yu-jin to get her take on that and much more.
There's a real dichotomy between what's happening at the macro level as opposed to what is really happening on the micro level. And so whilst I believe that the 5% GDP targets could be hit by outperforming exports, sustained fiscal stimulus, that doesn't really solve the endogenous problem of the micro level of sustained low confidence and low private consumption and investment. The other dichotomy is that you have this absolutely thrilling technological ecosystem and the great achievements that's happening, you know, marked by DeepSeek, but by many others, but as opposed to the softness of the economy, which is still persisting.
What is the reason for this dichotomy, you think?
I think that the government is trying to do a lot on the support side, but the economy itself has not really picked up or has created that engine to sustain the impact of the stimulus because we are really in a transition period from old industries into new industries, higher end manufacturing, leading edge technologies, and what that means for the economy. Of course, that's going to take time, but also the effects of the stimulus is just not as strong as it was 10 years ago. And a lot of on the monetary side, a lot of the credit is still stuck in the financial system. It's not going into the real economy, reaching the small and medium-sized companies. And so lowering that cost of capital for the wider economy is going to be absolutely critical.
One of the big transitions is banking on China becoming a consumption power. But there still seems to be this gap because, like you mentioned, it's a confidence issue. So how can that gap be bridged?
Well, if we were going to talk about consumption, we need to talk about jobs, right? Where are the jobs going to come from? We need to talk about social spending on things like Social Security, healthcare, education that make people feel more secure. We need to talk about moving from supply-based policies into demand-based policies and really incentivizing local governments who are in charge of the local economy to really be pushing on the consumption side. And the consumption of actual goods is actually not low at all in China. By some statistics, it's near the levels of consumption of goods of Americans. I think the big opportunity here is in services, both for the job reason and for stimulating additional consumption. Chinese services only account for half of GDP, 50%, and less than 50% of employment. These numbers should really be at 80%. And so I think the opportunities are local, overwhelmingly local, not in the first-tier cities anymore. It's about opening up the local economy to the new generation of highly innovative young people who want to create a local economy, raise the standards of living in all areas, not just the consumption of actual goods, but services, entertainment, tourism, and many other things that fit with their lifestyle.
What will it take to create these jobs that not just are there, but that people will want to take up and are able to take up?
Well, first of all, you have to lower the barriers of entry. You have to have good regulatory framework to allow private actors to step into these industries, to loosen some of these controls. But also, if you look at the skills, right, and the education system, it's geared towards a certain kind of job, but those are not necessarily the jobs that are available in China. So this is why the Chinese government is rapidly increasing the quality and the quantity of vocational training schools where the jobs actually lie. I think if you give a little bit more opportunities, we're talking about finance, I still think that this is at the critical core of the economy and technology. Financial services, financial access to these young people, to the small and medium-sized businesses will help push them into creating that local economic dynamism.
Some suggested there needs to be a stronger fiscal commitment from the government to signal that and boost confidence.
Everything's relative, right? If you look at the economic fundamentals relative to the U.S., potential U.S. financial economic recession, crisis, etc., a lot of global capital is actually taking another look at China. And of course, the DeepSeek moment that have spurred this new thought that actually China could well be ahead of the curve in terms of the technological dynamism is inviting more opportunities back into China. And of course, the Chinese government's opening up policies, especially in finance, in investment to the rest of the world, will help. It's just a cycle. It's not, most of the capital is not politicized, and it will return to China so long as, I think, what has improved in the last year or two is that they understand the Chinese government is completely focused on the economy, back on growth, not on the other things, back on growth, and trying to lure back investors and really laying down a foundation for that.
Where does that now leave trade?
China's transitioning from the old industries, low labor-intensive final goods exporter to key supplier of intermediary goods. Despite everything that is happening and the talks of decoupling, we're not really seeing decoupling between U.S. and China trade. It's just going through a longer route, through ASEAN countries, through Mexico, and so forth. Trade is going to be much more costly. And we're going to see a lot of recalibration of globalization. I'd say regionalized production plus localized technology in ASEAN countries. We're going to see also a lot more trade corridors, trade agreements signed between various parties, a lot more fragmentation, but not necessarily less opportunities. We're going to see less of a global order and a global umbrella that harnesses trade. But as we mentioned, these interdependencies are there to stay.
How much will the geopolitics factor into this long-term plan?
The internal economic challenges are still the primary challenges for the Chinese economy. So I think the stimulus policies are still very internally driven. I think we could expect a lot more coming in an elaborate, deliberate, calibrated manner, as the Chinese government likes to plan these things.
But is the time now?
The time was yesterday. But it's not too late yet. Really the challenge is how do you sustain? How do you sustain the effects of stimulus? And I do want to come back to the issue of jobs, create jobs.
And China's economy will continue to be closely watched as it gets ready to draw up a new 5-year plan from next year, setting out its economic and social goals amid a rapidly changing world. Olivia Xiong, CNA, Tianjin, China.
North Korea has opened a massive new beach resort for domestic tourists on its east coast. Now, footage from North Korean state media shows leader Kim Jong-un, his wife and daughter at the opening ceremony. Now, the resort can reportedly host nearly 20,000 people and is set to open next month. North Korea reopened to Russian tourists last year, the first time since the COVID-19 pandemic, and other foreign tour operators returned in February this year. The resort area is close to the port city of Wonsan, which used to be a prosperous area with links to Japan. Boats moved passengers and second-hand goods between Japan and Korea from the port until Tokyo stopped that arrangement in 2006 after Pyongyang conducted its first nuclear test. And that's all we've got for you in East Asia tonight, this Thursday. Don't forget your headlines anytime at cna.asia. Thanks for watching.
The weather brought to you by Trafalgar.